We tend to think of this world as being the definition of reality, and we tend to think that the things that we desire and experience as we are, in our human bodies, in our human personalities, are what it is that we're really seeking. And that's not entirely false. It's in the overall understanding of the spiritual path of self-realization, which is the underlying truth behind all spiritual paths. There is often this dichotomy between the world as it seems and the infinite power behind this world. And there's often this strange contradiction often between what we feel that are the things that we want, and then we have this idea in our mind that God wants something else. Years ago, I hear an echo when I'm speaking. Does anyone else hear that? It's a little distracting to me. Is it okay? All right? Okay. If it's all right for you, it's all right for me. Years ago, I was invited by an Episcopal priest friend of mine to participate in a dialogue that he was having, a Jewish Christian dialogue. This was in another city I was visiting. My family background is Jewish, and he thought it would be sort of fun to have a Jewish yogi at this Christian Jewish dialogue, and I was game. I always think these things are fun. So the Jews were in charge of that particular week, and Jewish people always feel that for anybody to understand the Jewish experience, you have to understand being a persecuted minority, because that has been virtually the self-definition of Jews. I can say that because I am one, so I can't be accused of anything except just speaking of our realities. And especially, of course, since the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust is always a big factor. I mean, I really realize that it really is a factor. I mean, people who grow up in the center of society, who've never been a persecuted minority, expect not to be persecuted. People who have grown up on the edge, whether you're a black person or an American Indian or a Jew or whatever, even if you never experience anything in your life, which I never have, there's still always in the back of your mind that you could suddenly be marginalized by the mainstream. It's just part of who you are. So it's an unfortunate truth, but there it is. So in this day, the rabbis had given to everybody to read some documents, some first-hand accounts of what it had been like to be in Europe, to be taken to concentration camps, and all these things that had happened. And they were the usual horror stories, because it was indeed a horror story, except for one. One of the readings was on a totally different level, totally different perspective. This is one of the Jewish readings, written by a Jewish man who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And he proposed that those years of absolute denial, when the entire world had turned its back on the Jewish people and they were being treated in such a unthinkable manner, was the shining hour for the Jewish people and for the Jewish religion, because the fundamental tenet of Judaism had always been the simple prayer, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And what that means is, listen, those of you who call yourself children of God. That's what Israel means. They try to say it's a special covenant, but as we say in our service, God chooses those who choose Him. So people who have declared themselves to be one for the infinite. And if that is the only reality, then whenever the conditions of your life, nothing has changed. And so he proposed that it was the opportunity for the Jewish people to prove the truth of their own deep tradition, which is wealthy, respected, marginalized, poor, tortured, or comforted. There is only one reality, and that reality is God. And that is what we live for. Even if deeply challenged on every level, to find that truth within us, that is what makes a people great. That's what makes a person great. Now, I went to this, and I thought this was like, this opens the dialogue on a whole new level and allows us all to talk as one. I couldn't get anybody in the room, even though they'd handed out that reading themselves. Nobody wanted to hear that one. They wanted to hear the one about you did this to us, and then they did this to us, and now we feel this way, and now you feel that way, and you have to feel like this. And it was all like this horizontal conversation. And yes, at the end of it, everybody has a little bit more understanding, but nobody has really shifted out of the basic thought that human life and human reality are what we're here for. But there's so many secret clues about that not really being so, just starting from the fact that it's so difficult to get a grip on this world, isn't it? We just, as soon as we get everything all organized in a certain way, time passes. Our children grow up, or your beloved child long hoped for turns out to be perhaps, of a different mental state, maybe completely different interests, maybe different karma, maybe even not functioning in this world in what we consider to be the acceptable way, or the beloved spouse dies, or the beloved spouse never shows up, and one spends one's whole life wishing it were different. But it's always this ever-changing parade, isn't it? And some people are just perfectly content with that. And they're just always expecting that as soon as I get the next thing worked out, then it's all finally going to get in order. But other souls, because, and there's only one reason for it, we've been through it before. We've been born into this world repeatedly. Everybody's been born into this world repeatedly. This is a fundamental tenet of how the world works and why. We've reincarnated in these physical bodies with ego personalities that identify with this particular little quadrant that we're in, and we try to find our satisfaction. That's what we're doing all the time. We're always looking for fulfillment. Very interestingly, in this course that we've been teaching on material success through yogic principles, we had the lesson on advertising. I'm teaching this class, and it's a very it's a very elevated class. It's also very practical. So you're going to talk about business. He talks about advertising. Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda who wrote this course, he raises this very interesting point. Is it moral to advertise at all? Is it in keeping with yogic principles to advertise? After all, the principle of yoga is that you overcome all desires. The desires are the source of suffering. You have to get off the wheel of samsara. You should desire nothing. How can a yogic person therefore create advertising, trying to get somebody to buy something? And he gave an extremely interesting explanation that I'd never heard or never thought about. He said, we are born into this world with the inner understanding that fulfillment is possible. Now, think about that for a minute. If we did not have planted within us this divinely inspired idea that I am here to be fulfilled, that I'm really not here just to be miserable and to feel lonely and to have nothing work out. Yes, it often turns out that way, but the reason that we're so annoyed by it is we know that's not how it's supposed to be. If we really thought that really all we do in this world is just be disappointed and unfulfilled, when we were disappointed and unfulfilled, it would just be, situation normal, right? Sometimes in the summer it's really hot. And we might not like it being hot, but after all, it's summer, it's hot. What do you expect? But within us, we know we were born for happiness. We know we were born for divine bliss. We know that somehow there is this perfect unity of spirit, unity of heart, unity of mind. The very word yoga means unity. Everything is supposed to come together. And when it doesn't come together, we know there's something wrong. And that's actually why we keep reincarnating. Often we reincarnate just to do the same thing again, thinking we'll have a different result. But nonetheless, we want to try it again. We make incremental changes. Everything was fine, but my hips were out of proportion with my shoulders. If my body was just in perfect proportion, then I would have been more beautiful, and then everything would have worked out. So we find those parents that will give us perfect proportioned hips and shoulders, and then we try a whole lifetime that way. We try a whole lifetime being rich, being poor, being a banker, being an artist. But we know that fulfillment is our destiny. And when you find people in this world who have given up the quest for fulfillment, that's not inspiring, is it? I'm not talking about world-renouncing yogis. I'm not talking about people who have given up one level of fulfillment because they have found a deeper one. I'm talking about people who have found nothing but have just tried to pretend that it's okay, right? You often see people like that, don't you? They look old. Doesn't matter if they're 12 years old, they look old. because all of the aspiration has gone out of their being. Now, we're not born just knowing that God is the answer. I mean, born in our first incarnation, the rule of this world is we learn by experience. I mean, you can't tell someone, all of you know that, and all of you know it about yourself. Somebody can tell you exactly, if you follow this course, this is going to happen. If you follow this, make this decision, this is going to happen. You think, yeah, it happened to you, but it's not going to happen to me, right? We know something when we experience it. And a wise mother, a wise father, a wise teacher tries to guide, but also leaves the space for the person to find out for themselves. Because when you know from your own experience, then you really know. So, God gives us the chance to keep trying, and we get to try just about everything. But what we're trying out is we're trying out the dynamic power of the quest for fulfillment. The knowing in our heart that there's something I'm looking for, and I'm going to keep looking for it. Now, coming all the way back to advertising, which I found the logic just absolutely charming, Master said, Swamiji said, you're not really doing people a disservice if you offer them uplifted things, uplifted services, honorable options. You know, if you're doing something immoral or unhealthy, that's something to consider. But things that have uplifted vibrations, you're helping people sort of follow through on that ever-refining reality of this quest for fulfillment until their experience is complete. Very interesting way to look at it, and not really entirely untrue, because everybody has to work on their own level. If you say to someone who's never experienced the power of success, the comfort of wealth, the fulfillment of human love, and say, oh, that's not going to fulfill you. You don't really want that. You know how hollow that rings. Of course, you don't really know that until we really experience it. Now, coming to where we are today with the vine and the husbandman and the attunement and all of that, one of the realities of life is this extraordinary desire for human love. I contemplate this a great deal. It's so remarkable to me. I'm in the wonderful position of having been married to a wonderful man. This man is Sita's husband. My husband, David, is not here today, just lest you confuse. This is also a wonderful man, but he's not my husband. But I'm in the position of having been married now for almost 30 years. I've been very, very fortunate in that respect. And there's a certain comfort that comes, when you're comfortably married to someone you're very well suited for. You've lived together for a long time. You're good friends. It's wonderful. I always say I think old love is nicer than new love. I know some people are attached to romance, but I favor a seasoned experience. But oh, how I remember, and I remember it as vividly as yesterday. I remember when I first met this man, David, that first year or two when we were deciding what we were going to do, just this overwhelming sense of inner compulsion. I was just so impressed by the power of that inner compulsion. I was compelled, to be in his company, to think about him, to wonder if we would have a life together, just all of these different things that were so far beyond my control. In Sri Yukteswar's book, The Holy Science, which is one of the books that's recommended on our spiritual path, it's extremely difficult to read. Very few people in our congregation have really read that book or understood it. Sri Yukteswar had a very elevated mind of wisdom, but in one portion of that book, which I have read the book, but I can't say that I know it, he talks about how we achieve purity of heart. And Sabina sang for us so beautifully. Janice on the harp was playing with her. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now all of these parallels are offered in that song. If you're merciful, you'll have mercy. If you forgive, you'll be forgiven. If you're pure in heart, then you'll have the experience of God. That's a pretty big promise. Now, what the purity of heart we're talking about, heart is where the longing comes from. Heart is the chakra from which essentially our energy is moved. It's because we have feeling for something that action is taken. If we just think about it, we can think about it really for a really long time, but we don't really do something about it until we have feeling. This is the Shakti power of the balance of male and female. Often it's a balance of a man and a woman, but it doesn't have to be. It's the male energy contemplates, reflects, analyzes, gets a clear picture. The feminine feels something, and that causes you to move. You could you could live right next door to the best restaurant in the whole city, but if you don't feel hungry, you won't go inside. You can even memorize the menu, but it's not until you feel hungry that you'll go there. So the purity of heart is when the feelings of the heart become more and more and more refined and more attuned to what it is that will actually fulfill those longings. And Sri Yukteswar describes in his book the 5 stages of purifying the heart, which I can't recite all of them right in this moment, but all 3, the first 3 of those 5 stages, are all about our interactions with one another, and all about all the different ways God compels us, and our own hearts compel us toward one another. Only when we're much more evolved can we move away from the intimacy of those relationships, and the heart then compels us to remain alone. Because then the feelings of the heart can be completely fulfilled only directly with God. And so even though we may say, oh, you shouldn't have desires, you shouldn't want this or want that, that many of those things are God implanted. They're implanted in us because those are the experiences that we need to drink that cup to the bottom of that cup so we'll know just how much happiness it gives us. See, this is one of the great secrets of life. If you imagine that it's going to give you this great happiness, you won't be satisfied till you drink it to the bottom. But once you've drunk it to the bottom, you can say, well, that was lovely, but there must be more. And you see, that's the sweetness about God. The sweetness about God is not that we live in this state of constant denial, and we're always hungry, and we're always longing, and we're always sort of ascetic and looking really pale and awful like this. The true saints, even though they may live in ways that look to the outsider like deprivation, their actual inner state is of great and constant fulfillment. Now, by these experiences, we find what it is that the heart is really longing for. And this is where the masters then begin to talk to us. What it is that you're longing for is that feeling of unbroken connectedness. Isn't that what we want when we want someone to love in our life? We want someone who's going to really give to us, to whom we can really give, that we can receive their affection, that we have a place to give all the feelings of the heart. So often people will talk to me, have talked to me, a woman who wants a child and was never able to have a baby for one reason or another, a man or a woman who wants a mate and hasn't found the right mate yet, whatever the story might be, people whose loved ones have died. And there's this feeling that I have all this to give and I have nothing to give it to. Or I'll say to a single person, what do you imagine will happen if you have a partner? You know, how do you imagine that you will express yourself? Well, begin to express yourself like that now. Because what you're really talking about is this inner energy that you want to pour out, this inner energy that you want to receive. And what the masters are telling us is that that reality is always there. And this word attunement is the word that they use. It's an exquisitely beautiful word, because what we're doing is there is a vibration in the universe. It's a vibration of sound. It's a vibration of light. It's a vibration of feeling. It's a vibration of energy, of courage, of wisdom, of understanding. But if our eyes are focused here, I'm going to receive that from you. I'm going to receive that from this. I'm going to have it after I do this. When I have this, I'll have it. We don't recognize that it's happening around us all the time because we're just not looking there. We have our eyes closed. We have our hearts closed. We have our definition this narrow. And if that's not in front of us, we think we're not there. There was this ridiculous movie made many years ago, very, very funny, with Peter Sellers. It was called The Mouse That Roared. It's really an extremely fun movie to watch. And there's this, the whole theme is this little tiny country is bankrupt, and they have this great idea that they will invade America, they will lose, and then America will flood them with aid, and then all their financial problems will be solved. So then this ridiculous army is created, and Peter Sellers plays about 7 roles in this movie, male, female, all these different things. So they invade the United States, and it happens to be during an air raid drill or something, and they accidentally win. Or they sort of seem to win, and they capture a small coterie of people, and then they have to take them back to their place, and these people are very, just sweet and charming, and so they want to treat them like honored guests, they want to give them food and beautiful women to take care of them and all of this. But there's this one tough soldier, and he just insists that all the rules of the Geneva Convention will be met for him, and his cell will be a certain size, and he will have all these different things, and he'll have tin plates, and he'll have these kinds of rations, and they think, well, if that's what you want. So everybody else is in the palace, having feasts and dancing, and he's sitting in his little cell, and he's really proud of himself, and he has his tin plate, and he has his beans, and he thinks he's gotten just what he wants, because that's where his reality is. And they're giving it to him because that's what he wants. And it's a silly movie, but it's just like Divine Mother. It's just the way Divine Mother treats us. Divine Mother has vibrating in the universe every single thing that your heart is longing for. Everything. I mean, it's so extraordinary to go deep in the privacy of your own heart and think not in terms of the form, I want this thing, that thing, but in terms of what it is behind that makes you long for that. And then say to yourself, I have that right now. And that's not an empty affirmation. Sometimes people affirm, everything is just fine. Everything is just fine. Oh yeah, everything is just fine. But you can hear in the tininess of the voice and the tension all behind it is not fine at all. Everything has to be held in tension to keep it like that. That's not attunement. Attunement is surrendering all of those little preconceptions, all of the Geneva Conventions that we've insisted on, all of the contract that we wrote, and just asking Divine Mother, I know you're there. I know you're there. Even behind my tears, I know you're there. Even behind all this, I don't know why life is so goofy. I was just thinking about that the other day. Nobody seems to get what they want. It just seems to be such a mess. As one of my friends put it so simply, he said the great tragedy of life is that A loves B, but B is in love with C, and then C, of course, is in love with D. You just go down the line, and everybody wants the same things, and it seems like it'd be so easy to organize it. And we just sort of get everybody facing in the right direction, and it would all work. But God didn't intend that, because He doesn't want us to be satisfied with beans on a tin plate, which is really what we think we want, when what we really want is we want an infinity of joy that nothing can touch. We want so much power, as that rabbi tried to say, as the rabbi did say because he was a survivor. He said, when everything is taken away from us, that gives us the chance to say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Even in this moment, the divine is always the same with me. And the question for us is whether we receive it. There's that fantastic line in the Bible from John. John says about Jesus, as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. What does it mean to be a son of God? That means to be one with the infinite. Jesus was using that as an image to say the Son is one with the Father. The Son receives the inheritance of the Father. The Son is under the protection of the Father. The Son is raised by the Father to be like the Father, to take his place. And St. John says, there's no limit to how many of us can rise to that reality. All we have to do is receive it. But of course, then the heart has to want nothing else. Because you have to bring yourself into a level of attunement. And what breaks that attunement? Oh, here I am doing the Om technique, listening Om, Om, Om. I wonder what's for lunch, and then after lunch I wonder where I'll go, and then I wonder if who will go with me and what will happen. Om, Om, Om. You know, that's the story, isn't it? Is that we long for this, and then we want this, and this, and this. All of spiritual practice, this is what the reading says, all of spiritual practice is attunement. Bringing ourselves, when we wander, back to that one-pointed desire for God. And to do those things as often as we can, as deeply as we can, as much as we can, that remind us, oh yes, this is what I wanted. Oh yes, this is what I wanted. This is all I've ever wanted. That's why we come, gather in this temple. That's why we sing. That's why we chant. That's why we pray. That's why we meditate. Oh yes, this is what I've always wanted. To as many as received him, to them gave he the power. Attunement. Attune yourself to that which is, and you will discover that which is who you are. Infinite joy. From joy I came, Master says. For joy I live. In sacred joy I melt. Bless you.